Picture a company dinner, long table, fancy restaurant. At one end sits the VP of sales. Makes $400,000 a year. Has a mortgage on a house he probably should not have bought. Two car payments that together exceed most people's rent. A credit card balance that has been hovering around $18,000 for 2 years. And a savings account that could not survive 3 months without his paycheck. At the other end of the table sits the new hire, 26 years old, makes $42,000 a year, has a credit card balance that has been hovering around $4,000 for 2 years, a car payment that exceeds what he should be spending on transportation, and a savings account that could not survive 3 months without his paycheck. To completely different income levels, to completely different social circles, to completely different versions of what financial stress looks like from the outside. One identical financial structure underneath. Both of them are broke, just at different price points. And here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The mistakes keeping the VP broke and the mistakes keeping the new hire broke are not different mistakes at the different ends of that income spectrum. They are the exact same mistakes. Scaled up, same psychology, same patterns, same traps, just with more zeros attached. This video about those mistakes, because understanding them does not just explain why some people stay broke. It explains why more income alone almost never fixes the problem. My name is Sig and I spend way too much time thinking about money, the behavioral patterns that keep people stuck regardless of what they earn, and why the assumption that more income solves financial problems is one of the most expensive misconceptions most people carry through their entire working lives. Subscribe to this channel right now if you want to understand the real mechanics of why financial stress follows people up the income ladder instead of disappearing when the salary goes up. And give this video a thumbs up if it changes something about how you think about your own relationship with money, because the mistake I am going to describe is almost certainly one you are making right now regardless of where you are on that income spectrum. Let me name the core mistake before we go any further, because everything else in this video builds on understanding it clearly. The mistake is this: spending expands to fill income, always, automatically, without conscious decision, without deliberate choice, like a gas filling a container. Whatever the container is, the gas fills it completely. Whatever the income is, the spending fills it completely. At $42,000 a year, the new hire spends $41,000. At $400,000 a year, the VP spends $390,000. Same gap, same financial fragility, same inability to absorb a disruption without crisis. Different numbers at the top, identical structure underneath. Economists call this Parkinson's law applied to money. Parkinson originally described it in the context of work. Work expands to fill the time available for its completion. The financial version is equally reliable. Spending expands to fill the income available for its expenditure. And the reason this happens is not weakness or irresponsibility or poor character. It is a deeply human psychological response to having resources available. When resources are available, the brain does not naturally conserve them. It naturally allocates them to comfort, to status, to convenience, to the things that feel like rewards for the effort that produced the income in the first place. This is not a flaw. It is how human psychology works. The flaw is in assuming that more income will create a different result when the underlying psychology has not changed. Here is the first specific mistake that shows up identically at every income level. People mentally spend their raises before the money ever hits their account. The VP hears he is getting a $100,000 salary increase and immediately begins thinking about the house upgrade he has been wanting. The new hire hears he is getting a $6,000 raise and immediately begins thinking about the car upgrade he has been wanting. Neither of them sits with the new income and asks what this could become if I directed it differently. Neither of them treats the raise as a wealth-building opportunity. Both of them treat it as permission to expand their lifestyle to a level they have been quietly wanting to reach and now feel entitled to reach. The raise arrives. The spending expands. The gap stays identical. The financial stress stays identical, just denominated in larger numbers. The specific move that separates the top 10% from everyone else at every income level is not a complicated investment strategy. It is the decision to let some raises widen the gap instead of letting all raises expand the lifestyle. Not every raise, some, even one. The person who earns a $6,000 raise and directs $3,000 of it to investments and expands their lifestyle by $3,000 has done something that most people at every income level never do. They let compounding start working on a portion of their income growth instead of consuming all of it immediately. Here is the second mistake that runs identically through every income level and that is responsible for some of the most spectacular financial collapses I have ever read about. Confusing how much you earn with how much you are worth. The VP earns $400,000 per year. That is his identity. His cars, his house, his restaurant choices, his vacation destinations. All of them are calibrated to signal an income of $400,000 per year. His net worth, which is the actual measure of financial health, is approximately negative $40,000 when you subtract his debts from his assets. He is worth less than nothing, but he earns a lot, and in his social circle, in his own self-perception, in the decisions he makes every day, income is the number that matters. Net worth is a number he avoids calculating. The new hire earns $42,000 per year. His credit card, his car loan, his student loans mean his net worth is approximately negative $22,000. He is also worth less than nothing. He also avoids calculating the actual number because the actual number is uncomfortable. Both of them are navigating their financial lives using the wrong scorecard. Income is the rate at which money flows in. Net worth is the measure of whether any of it is staying. A person who earns $40,000 per year and spends $35,000 is building net worth faster than a person who earns $400,000 and spends $410,000. Income is the raw material. Net worth is what you build with it. Confusing the two is how people end up earning generational wealth and retiring with nothing. Here is the third mistake, and it is the one that creates the most durable financial damage at every income level. Using debt to maintain a lifestyle that income alone cannot support. The new hire's credit card balance exists because his income does not comfortably cover his expenses and debt fills the gap. The VP's credit card balance exists because his income does not comfortably cover his expenses and debt fills the gap. Same mechanism, same solution, same long-term consequence. The specific flavor of the debt is different. The new hire is carrying grocery store credit card debt and a car loan that was slightly above his comfortable range. The VP is carrying home equity lines of credit, premium vehicle financing, and credit card debt from a lifestyle that require just a little more than the income produced in any given month. But the structural problem is identical. Both of them have an expenses number that reliably exceeds their income number. And rather than reducing the expenses number, they have been borrowing to cover the gap. Debt is not a solution to an income problem. Debt is the problem wearing the costume of a solution. It makes the present month work by making every future month slightly harder. It adds an interest obligation that increases the expenses number without increasing any asset. And it compounds in the direction of more obligation, more interest, more difficulty, until the gap between income and expenses becomes impossible to close without a fundamental restructuring of how money is being managed. Here is where I want to go deeper, because the three mistakes I have described so far are all symptoms of something more fundamental that almost never gets discussed honestly in personal finance content: the psychology of financial identity. How you see yourself financially determines every financial decision you make. And the problem is that most people's financial identity is built around income rather than behavior. The new hire sees himself as someone who does not make enough yet. The VP sees himself as someone who has earned the right to live at this level. Both of these identities produce the same outcome. One is waiting for more income to solve the problem. The other believes income already solved the problem. Neither of them has built an identity around being someone who builds wealth. And until that identity shift happens, more income does not fix the problem, it scales it. Here is a specific behavioral pattern that shows up with remarkable consistency at every income level. The emergency fund that exists in principle but not in practice. Ask the new hire if he has an emergency fund. He will tell you he is working on it. He has about $800 in a savings account. He intends to build it up. He just has not gotten around to making it a priority. Ask the VP if he has an emergency fund. He will tell you he has access to a home equity line of credit if something comes up. Or he could liquidate some investments. Or he has credit cards with high limits that could handle most emergencies. Both of these answers describe the absence of an actual emergency fund dressed up in the language of having options. The new hire has $800, which covers approximately 0 emergencies of any significance. The VP has theoretical access to debt that he would have to take on at interest rates that punish him for using it. Neither of them has 3 to 6 months of actual living expenses sitting in a liquid account that exists specifically to absorb disruptions without triggering debt or investment liquidation. And the consequence of this shared absence is the same at both income levels. When the disruption comes, because it always comes, it goes on debt. The debt increases the monthly obligation. The increased monthly obligation makes the gap between income and expenses wider. The wider gap makes the next disruption more likely to create the same outcome. The cycle runs identically whether the emergency is an $800 car repair or an $8,000 roof replacement. Here is the mistake that I find most fascinating because it reveals so clearly how misdirected financial energy gets applied at every income level. People optimize aggressively for the small decisions and passively accept the large ones. The new hire spends 45 minutes researching which streaming service has the best value before canceling one. He spends 0 minutes researching whether his car loan interest rate is the best he could get or whether refinancing would save him money. He tracks his grocery spending meticulously. He has never once called his car insurance provider to ask for a better rate or shopped competitors. The VP hires a financial advisor and pays 1% of assets annually in fees without ever researching whether a low-cost index fund approach would produce better after-fee returns. He negotiated aggressively on the price of his last car but accepted the financing rate the dealer offered without a second thought, costing him thousands in interest. He cuts costs in his business with analytical precision, but has never sat down to calculate what his housing costs as a percentage of income and whether the decision still makes mathematical sense. Both of them are spending their financial attention on low-leverage decisions while leaving high-leverage decisions on autopilot. The 10 minutes it takes to call an insurance provider and ask for a loyalty discount or shop a competitor often produces $100 to $300 annual saving. The 30 minutes it takes to refinance a car loan at a lower rate can save thousands over the loan period. The decision to move from a 1% expense ratio fund to a 0.04% index fund on a $300,000 portfolio saves $3,000 per year in fees. These are not complicated optimizations. They are high-leverage decisions that reward the 5% of people who make them and quietly tax the 95% who do not. Here is the last mistake, and it is the most important one because it is the belief that keeps all the other mistakes in place. The belief that a higher income number will produce a fundamentally different financial experience. The new hire believes that when he is earning $80,000, the financial stress will go away. The VP believed the same thing when he was earning $80,000, then when he was earning $150,000, then when he was earning $250,000. At every level, the same thing happened. The expenses expanded. The identity recalibrated upward. The gap stayed identical. The stress stayed identical, just with more zeros. The research on this is consistent and sobering. Studies on lottery winners, on professional athletes who go from poverty to multi-million-dollar contracts, on executives who receive large salary increases, all of them show the same pattern. Within 2 to 3 years of a dramatic income increase, the person's financial stress levels return to their pre-windfall baseline. Not because they made bad decisions, because their spending adjusted to the new normal, and the psychological experience of having more money than obligations return to whatever their habitual gap had always been. More income does not produce financial peace. A wider gap produces financial peace, and the gap is a behavior, not an income level. It can be created at $40,000 per year. It can be destroyed at $400,000. The choice of which one happens is almost entirely determined by whether you understand that the gap is the goal, not the income number that sits above it. Let me be practical, because this video should not end with a diagnosis and no prescription. The pattern breaks when one thing changes. The financial identity shifts from income-based to behavior-based. Specifically, when a person stops asking how much do I earn and starts asking how much of what I earn am I keeping and making work for me. That shift produces different decisions at every income level. It produces the decision to automate savings before spending instead of saving what is left over. It produces the decision to calculate net worth monthly instead of avoiding the number. It produces the decision to let some raises widen the gap instead of expanding the lifestyle. It produces the decision to optimize the high-leverage financial decisions, the housing cost, the investment fees, the insurance premiums, the debt interest rates, instead of spending financial energy on low-leverage ones. None of these decisions require a high income to execute. They require a specific understanding of what the goal actually is. The goal is not to earn more. Earning more is the raw material. The goal is to build a widening gap between what comes in and what goes out, and to direct that gap toward things that compound forward instead of things that disappear immediately. That goal is available to the new hire at $42,000. It is available to the VP at $400,000. The income is irrelevant to the goal. The behavior is everything. Remember the two people at the dinner table I described at the beginning. The VP and the new hire broke at different price points, making the same mistakes at different scales. Here is the version of that story that almost never gets told. The new hire at that table who understands what I just explained, who makes the identity shift from income-based to behavior-based, who decides that the gap is the goal, who automates his savings before he spends and lets his raises widen the gap instead of expanding his lifestyle. That person at $42,000 is building more real wealth than the VP at $400,000, not because he earns more, because he understands something the VP never figured out. That financial peace is not a reward for earning enough. It is the result of building a gap wide enough, and the gap can be built right now, at whatever income you are currently at. If you stop waiting for the income number to change and start changing the behavior instead, now that you understand why income alone never fixes financial stress, the next question is what actually does fix it. In my next video, breaking down the real reason most people stay paycheck to paycheck forever, and it has nothing to do with how much they earn. That video is linked on the screen right now. Watch it next.